Hey guys, and welcome to the video. So today's video is a little bit different. So I'm going to be going through a father's perspective of what it was like to go through a trisomy diagnosis and the sort of things that we faced at the time, my perspective, and that sort of feeling of helplessness that you find a lot of the time, because there's going to be so many people out there at the moment that are going through similar sort of things, and especially during this lockdown period when you don't have that opportunity to have the face-to-face conversations with professionals, with friends and with family as well. So I was hoping that by sharing this perspective with people that maybe it'd help reach people out there, give them some hope and help them realise that there are outlets and avenues that you can go to. So we're also going to be launching as of tomorrow a new service where people will be able to book in video calls or telephone calls to be able to talk to myself and Sarah about the sort of things that we went through. So anybody else who is facing similar issues at the moment during pregnancy or anything afterwards as well, we're going to be opening that up so that way we can hopefully support you through that. Now, we aren't health professionals by any means, but this is something we've gone through very recently. It's one of the reasons we started the channel. It's one of the reasons we started this business as well. It's a passion project of us that we really want to be able to get out there and help people through this difficult time. There are so many unknowns, so many things that need more research, and hopefully by talking it through and talking through some of those issues that potentially you're facing, some of those hardships and some of those unknown quantities, maybe we can help to shed a bit of light on that, to give you a fresh perspective and just help you through that journey. There won't be any cost or anything at all incurred with this, and it is part of our passion project to be able to help people who are going through similar sort of situations as well. So here's my account of what we went through with our daughter Amelia. So apparently this new light that we've got is giving me a halo effect, which is blinding me. I shouldn't look directly at it. It's one of those things that I still remember very clearly. That very first diagnosis when we got the phone call, and I remember I was at work at the time and my wife had tried getting in contact with me and then she'd sent me messages, and it's one of those things she would have had the conversation with me face to face, but me needing to know more and more about it, I just kept on pushing and pushing and pushing to find out. And then finding out the news and the severity of what all of this meant, that impact really started to sink in. And it's just one of those things that you think will never happen to you until it actually does. And reading through those messages, my whole world started to crumbling down at that point. It was one of those things that at first I had such a little understanding of it. I'd never heard of anything to do with Edwards or Patel, anything to do with trisomy. I'd heard of some of the big things like Down syndrome, but this was completely uncharted territory to me. Fortunately for me, Sarah did enough research to last an entire lifetime, and she found out everything she could between me receiving those text messages and finding out a bit about it and me arriving home where we had the conversation. And as I started to learn more about it, it just seemed like it was going to be one of those things that would be a blip on the radar, so to speak. We'd had an anomaly in a test and that was all it was, and we would soon find out better answers, because this surely couldn't be happening to us. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. We received the heartbreaking call shortly after to explain that our baby was most likely incompatible with life, and the chances were that she wouldn't make it through to childbirth. Unfortunately, she would most likely die during pregnancy, and all the stats were completely against us. The message was loud and clear that this wasn't looking good, and that incompatible with life phrase was thrown around so much right from that very early stage. What we were told on this call was that the tests had been run twice and there was less than a 1% margin of error. So we had options, we could do further tests, but why bother? At the end of the day, the stats were against us, and the message we were getting loud and clear was, this has a tiny margin of error. They couldn't possibly be wrong. So why would you go down that avenue of seeking out more tests when already it was so hopeless and everything was stacked against us? Obviously, when you're getting told those sort of stats and all this information has just been thrown at you non-stop, you're just completely bombarded and your world starts to fall apart. It's very hard to kind of grasp onto anything because you're following the professional's advice. And at this stage, we started to plan for the worst. We looked at the termination options. We didn't want our child to be suffering, and that's what we were being told over and over again, that this was going to be a life of hardship. It was going to be suffering. There would be so many health abnormalities that would be happening. Surely it would be easier to take that route straight away early on before that suffering could really kick in. So obviously that's what we started looking into. And things just got on top of us. You become numb to it. The emotional side of it, it really becomes absolutely crushing. And from a father's perspective, it was so difficult because you almost feel that you're on the sideline, so to speak, because the baby's not inside you. You're not the one carrying this child. And it almost felt to me as though I had no right to grieve at this stage. I had to be the one that stayed strong, that my wife could lean on for when she fell apart, which would inevitably happen. And it just felt selfish of me to be able to fall into that trap. So I was very much following through on her emotions and her emotional needs, and not necessarily responding to mine, which obviously is never a good thing. We started to look at the options to terminate, and it was just such a heartbreaking ordeal to go through. And as I said previously, it just felt like one of those things that I wasn't allowed to feel at this stage, and I had to be emotionally numb. I had to be strong for obviously my wife and for my family as well, as we went through this heartbreaking time. And it would only be at the end of this process that I'd be able to start feeling this. Even though every single day felt like some kind of living nightmare that was just almost impossible to explain to anybody. It was a nightmare in the respect that we had so many people that were talking to us and saying, wow, you must be so excited, your second child is on the way, what are you thinking of names, when's the due date? In the back of your mind, you're kind of putting on this brave face and go, yes, yeah, it's great, you know, I can't wait for that. And ultimately having to keep all of that bottled up until you could either have a firm diagnosis, until all of this was done. And it was just such a struggle because of that. The first point where things started to turn around for us was when Sarah told me about a case in Australia where a couple had been misdiagnosed, or where the science and everything just hadn't quite added up, and actually they'd gone for further tests and they'd really fought through this. And when she was giving me this information, it just seemed like a pipe dream. It was wishful thinking, something that she was clinging on to, because obviously it was a denial stage. You don't want to have to grieve for this child, and I completely supported her in exploring it. But to me, it didn't really feel real. There was no chance. This science told us that our child was going to die. Our child was incompatible with life. All of the stats were telling us this at the time. The research had been done, the professionals had spoken, and they'd labelled us as incompatible with life. But obviously wanting to support Sarah through this, we decided to look into this a little bit more. I still remember the first time when we sat down in the hospital to speak to one of the consultants about this, and this is when we were pushing for more testing to be done so we could find out a little bit more about our child and the chances that there could be something that had been misdiagnosed. And the consultant, very grim face, sat down with us and basically said, you know, we're here today to talk to you and help you understand that you're making the right decision in terminating this pregnancy. I'm going to draw you a diagram to show you what's happened and the reasons why you are making the right decision today. And I completely understand. The science told her that she was right with this. Her experience told her that she was right with this. And everything that had come before was telling her that she was right with this. Why would she treat it any differently? She had no reason to, and it was us clutching at straws. She was trying to be ultimately the one who was going by the facts, whereas we were clinging to emotion at this stage. After she'd given us the grim presentation, we decided to go ahead with CVS and attempt to do this. Unfortunately at the time, we weren't able to do this due to placental positioning and all of that, and just the circumstances not being ideal. At this point, it really looked as though the consultant just took pity on us and decided that she would call ahead to the labs to find out if any of the long-term cultures had come back from previous tests. They weren't due for days, so she was just very much going through some processes to, I guess, make us feel a little bit better. Fortunately for us, this was the very first stage where we had a stroke of luck, where the odds started to turn and favour us a little bit. It was the first stroke of good fortune at this stage, and somebody in the lab was clearly having a very good day. Even though the test results were far too early at this stage, they basically confirmed to the consultant that what was being indicated by the culture so far was the fact that this was confined mosaicism. This was honestly the first stage where things felt a little bit more hopeful. And it's not because I heard the phrase confined mosaicism and thought, hey, brilliant, this could work out in our favour. I had no idea what that meant, but it was the look on the consultant's face. Suddenly she just seemed, I suppose, deflated and confused and lost, that all of her journals and research and stats didn't add up, and none of that really made sense anymore. And once she got off the phone and she kind of reported this back to us, her words were, at this stage, we were strongly waiting to get back further results and don't go ahead with the termination. Everything in that moment had completely changed for us. It was the very first time any of the conversations with the professionals hadn't been about termination or losing our baby. It was the very first time that anybody had spoken to us at the stage and been hopeful about anything, or at least putting it off until we had further facts to go on. The next few months were Honestly, insane. All of the growth scans looked perfect. Everything that we could see on these scans looked brilliant with the baby. And the first lot of the next tests came back and they all pointed to good signs. Everything looked healthy, things were looking good. But then another long-term culture came back saying everything looked bad again, and suddenly we were there panicking. We then went back in for some more scans and everything looked good. We then went back in for some more scans after that and it looked like the baby had a hole in their heart. We then went back to see somebody in cardiology and the baby no longer looked like they had a hole in their heart. Things were up and down and all over the place. And it very much got to the stage where we just had to kind of hold on to hope. We'd seen these scans and all of the indicators looked like we had a healthy baby. There were so many things saying one thing and so many things saying the absolute opposite. And nobody could really knit that together. And it all came down to, in our opinion, I suppose a lack of research and a lack of understanding. It is such a thing that is so large in scope that nobody could give us a concrete answer. And our consultant at the time very much said, we will not know until the baby is born whether or not there is anything wrong. All signs at the moment on all these growth scans are looking positive. And at this stage, we were just preferred so we could have further scans instead. After months of absolute uncertainty, my mind was more than a little broken. And it was really just a case of holding it all together so I could be strong for my family. I still remember it really vividly, just sitting down in the kitchen one day and curling up in the corner and just crying because I had no idea what was happening with our little baby girl. We just didn't know, and that uncertainty would be with us right up until the birth. We just had no idea, and from a father's perspective, just feeling so incredibly helpless to be able to help my child or to be able to make the right decisions because there was so little facts to go on. It's one of those things where we were all in this together, me, my wife, my family, but also all the health workers and the consultants. It was something so new and just so unique that so many people hadn't seen before. When we were speaking to people at the hospital, it was one of those things where our unborn daughter seemed to be famous and people would be talking about her beforehand and they would all be commenting that they'd never seen anything like it. And it was just such a learning experience for everybody, and everybody was going through this together, and it just felt so bizarre. It was even right up to Amelia's birth, where during labour we were constantly being asked, what do we do with the placenta? Do we need to send it away? Do we need to do further testing? What happens when the baby arrives? Because everybody there was just so unsure of what to do. It was an unprecedented thing that they were going through. And again, it's because so many things just get axed right at an early stage because of that information that's coming through. During the labour at the final stages, the midwife even talked about having a team on standby, and myself and Sarah just had no idea what they're on about because we didn't have that for the birth of our son. And when I finally looked up, there was a whole team there with this machine that looked like it was about to go toe-to-toe with Optimus Prime and just have an enormous Transformers battle. But that's because everybody was so convinced that even at this stage, and even with all the positive evidence from the growth scans and some great looking tests, that our daughter was going to die. And that's why they had people there ready to deal with this. The uncertainty of any diagnosis like this is absolutely horrific, and the heartache and the emotional turmoil that comes with it is just, it's so hard to explain until you're in that situation. And I just wish that this sort of thing was handled differently. If from that initial test that we had, it was just a red flag next to your name that said, hey, when you come in for some scans, we just need to look a little bit closer and we need to look in a little bit more detail because this flag's shown up. But instead, the way it was presented to us was, unfortunately, due to these tests, your child is incompatible with life. They will be suffering. If the child does make it to childbirth, then these are the issues that you will be facing, and they will most likely won't live past a year old. And it was just negative, negative, negative. And now I am not saying at all that there wasn't a chance at all. Of course it is. The science is there for a reason. But there are chances that people are terminating because of the pressure and because of the information that's being given to them at that very early stage. In my opinion, and in my wife's opinion, it just needs to be a red flag, and more research is done from that point on, and more care is given to that parent that can guide them through it. I cannot imagine what it is like to be an upcoming parent at the moment during lockdown, and especially with a diagnosis like this. And that is why we are offering the support where people can contact us to talk it through with us, to talk through our experience and what you're going through as well, so that we can just help give you that fresh perspective, that other place to look as well, because the information you'll be getting at the moment will be very limited, and we completely understand that. looking back on what I went through, the feelings, the emotion, everything, I cannot imagine how we would have coped during this lockdown period or anything like that. It boggles the mind not having those people to speak to and not being able to have those face-to-face conversations. The way everything was presented to us throughout this entire thing was just all so factual. It was all based on out-of-date research or limited research, and everybody just seemed to be amazed every single step of the way by how much we were bucking the trends, by how much we were defying the odds. And that's what's scary, that everybody is going on all of these unique cases and just giving incorrect or misguided advice. Even now we're through the storm, we've not had any further tests to find out anything more about Amelia. And one of the key reasons we haven't done this is because some of the horror stories that we've heard and some of the other parents that we've spoken to, a lot of the time what happens if the diagnosis of Edwards or Patau is given out, then a lot of health issues that are not related at all just get lumped in with it, and they're not treated because of this. And it seems absolutely criminal that these children are treated as second-class citizens because they have this diagnosis. So for us, it doesn't serve any advantage. In our opinion, our daughter is absolutely perfect, and of course we're biased, but everything is healthy, everything looks good, and seeking out a diagnosis just seems to be at the detriment of her future, and it's just not something we're going to risk. That might be selfish, especially for what we're pioneering for and what we're fighting for and raising awareness. We're ultimately not willing to sacrifice our daughter's future for that, but it is something to bear in mind. And ultimately what we were advised by the consultant was, if your daughter looks healthy and everything seems good, do not get any further tests done because they could go against you and her health and future. Honestly, it's one of the most horrific things we've ever had to go through. And like I said, from a father's perspective, that feeling of absolute helplessness was just absolutely soul destroying. But we came out of it on the other side. And if there is a glimmer of hope that we can take from this, it's that these tests are not what they're made out to be. They are most certainly worthwhile having. I would advocate that, because you want to know early on if there are any warning signs. But trust me, from experience, take them as a red flag that you want to research, something that you will want to look into more detail for, get further scans done, just do a little bit more digging and find out whether or not your child is healthy. But do not see them as the be-all and end-all that they are presented to be. They are by no means 99.9% accurate as they are told to be by health professionals. That is just misrepresentation of facts, so do ignore that. If they come back with a result, then it is certainly worthwhile taking note of, and you want to do something about that. But trust your gut, get a further perspective, find out a little bit more, and do more research and the tests available to you. Don't make a knee-jerk reaction, because we almost did, and had we have done that, our lives would be very different right now. We threw the dice and we went through hell, and I'm glad that we did, because we came out the other side. But just, if you're in this situation, trust your gut, trust your instincts. At the end of the day, you know your situation better than anybody else. There is further research out there, there is further things to be done, and there is so much more than you're initially presented with. Take the time to take a step back and think through the options that you want to do, and discover a little bit more. Ask the questions, push for more tests, push for more scans. These are the things that will help you to make an informed decision. Don't do what we did, which was trust that very first phone call telling us that, unfortunately, we've run this test twice and there's less than a 1% margin of error, so it's looking very likely that your child's incompatible with life. Had we have gone through with what we were going through, it's just not worth thinking about. So there is always another avenue, and you want to make sure you have all of the facts and don't fall for the misrepresented facts. It breaks my heart to think about all of those people who've lost their little miracles based on the fact that science and stats don't lie. Unfortunately, they can be presented in a way that does kind of make them lie, which just isn't right. And again, there are some brilliant places out there that you can get more information about that. One of the charities that has been pivotal, for us anyway, is Soft UK. They do some amazing work with situations like this. There are so many brilliant stories and inspirational people that you can hear from by going through to Soft UK, so it's most certainly worthwhile checking them out. Also, as I said, As of tomorrow, we will be launching the service where you can get in contact with us and we can arrange to have a phone call or a video call, even if you just need to talk about some of the things that you're going through during pregnancy, after pregnancy. If you just need to talk to somebody about parenting in general, that is something that we are passionate about helping you through. We understand the emotional turmoil that becoming a parent just in general brings. You know, it's a thunderstorm. Children strike and they just blow up your routine, and it is hard. But having anything else on top of that, whether that be lockdown, whether that be a diagnosis early on in your pregnancy, any of that, in any way that we can help, that is what we want to be there for. And that is why we'll be starting the service as of tomorrow. As always, really hope you've enjoyed this video and that it's brought something to you. If you know anybody who needs to hear this sort of message, or anybody that this could help for, forward them on the links, get them in touch with us, and we will do our best to help. And all you need to do is drop us a message, either in the comments, through YouTube, through Facebook, Instagram, whatever platform you're watching us on. Get in contact and we'll see what we can do. Take care, stay safe, and I hope you're all well.